Yashar Koach Hazan. I'll never forget the moment last year, Erev Pesach, right about this time of day actually, when I set the table for the Seder and broke down crying. I'd spent the previous 3 days deep cleaning the house, moving the Pesach dishes from the garage to the kitchen and the Chametz dishes from the kitchen to the garage, shopping and cooking, and trying to get a little bit of work done, and keeping Rebecca and Hannah occupied because they had been home from school for a couple of weeks since school had closed. And I was pretty much totally exhausted. Earlier that morning, I had taken down a photo mosaic that we keep upstairs of our parents and our siblings, and I placed it on the table propped up against a stack of Haggadot that would go unused. The idea was to keep the pictures of those that we would be missing in front of us during the evening as a kind of spiritual boost. But at that particular moment, the pictures only contributed to the overwhelming sense that something was terribly wrong. As we have all said to ourselves many times over the past year, it is not supposed to be this way. So with most of the prep work for the meal behind me, I finally went to the china cabinet, pulled down 4 of our good Pesach plates, and I placed them down on a table usually set for 20 or more, and I fell into a dining chair, my face streaming with tears. Yesterday, Shira's fully vaccinated family of medical professionals began to descend upon our house from disparate airports across the country, and though it still feels a little bit strange standing by myself in the music room talking into a computer while the rest of my family is not out there in the kahal in shul, but participating in virtual shul in the other room or just chasing after Hannah and Rebecca in the backyard, I'll take it. And while I know that still many people, my parents included, won't get to experience the cathartic relief of sitting at a much fuller table this year for their Sidarim, I've been thinking about and wondering about where the emotional punch of these 2 very different experiences of Zman Cherutenu, the season of our liberation, will be felt for Jews, and where it was felt last year and how it will feel this year. For me, the emotional punch came with those plates. For others, it might have been counting the number of matzah balls for the soup. Last year, for others, it might have been the quiet of an empty room that this year will be filled with voices of song and laughter. But for some, the emotion might not have been sparked by food or by place settings, but by the words of the Haggadah itself. We begin the Magid, the retelling of the Exodus story, not with Moses or Pharaoh or Egyptians or Israelites, and not even with praise to God for redeeming our ancestors from the bonds of slavery, but with the Aramaic invocation Halachma Anya. Referring to the uncovered matzahs, we proclaim, "This is the bread of destitution that our ancestors ate in the land of Egypt. Anyone who is famished should come and eat, and anyone who is in need should come and partake of the Pesach sacrifice. Now we are here. Next year, we will be in the land of Israel. This year, we are slaves. Next year, we will be a free people." How incredibly powerful and poignant those words became last year and will be again this year, but for completely different reasons. Last year, we could neither invite stranger nor friend to share in our food. The Seder is not just a reenactment of the Exodus, but of the ritual that our ancestors shared in just before they left Egypt. The Torah commanded us that once the lamb was slaughtered and roasted, none of the meat from the lamb could be left over once the morning broke. And because a whole lamb is a lot of meat, that meant that no Israelite family could partake in the offering alone. Families had to form chavurot. They had to join together with their neighbors to ensure that every last scrap of food would be eaten. The Paschal lamb was a symbol of abundance and of community. Thanks to God's grace, we had more than we could possibly need ourselves. So we looked outward. We activated our generosity and our desire for connection. Each year at the Seder, we tell ourselves the same thing. Right now, in this moment, we have more than enough. We open our doors wide, fitting as many people as we can into our crowded living and dining rooms. As the numbers on the checkout screen at the supermarket double or triple or quadruple what we usually spend on a few nights of food, we shrug our shoulders. This is the Seder. And at a Seder, no one goes hungry. And thankfully, there's no mitzvah about not having leftover brisket or potato kugel once the evening is over. How difficult these words were to say last year. Kol difchin yetei v'yivsach. Anyone who is hungry, let them come in and eat. And yet, despite the sadness that we felt then, how amazing was it for the Haggadah to have anticipated the exact words that we would need to hear written on its ancient pages. Hashtahacha, this year we are in this place. L'shana haba'ah b'Yerushalayim. Next year in Jerusalem. This year we are here. This year we are alone. Next year we will be surrounded by our brothers and sisters, by our family in the promised land. And I know that what many of us are planning for this evening isn't exactly what we had in mind, but the hope and the excitement and the relief that has accompanied the rising percentage of the vaccinated population has truly begun to take hold. Cautious optimism, born out of a miracle, a medical miracle, a redemption never seen before in human history, has helped us to believe that though for now we may still be enslaved to this deadly virus, by next year we will be B'nai Chorim. We will be free to gather in large numbers again with our family and our friends. The Exodus story is everywhere in Jewish life and in Jewish sacred literature. In full detail in the Torah and in concise references in our prayer book, it's impossible to read a Jewish text without encountering it. It's woven into every fiber of our cultural and historical lexicon. So if we all know the story, why is the Seder the most observed ritual in the history of the Jewish people? In his new book, which is currently sitting at number 1 on the Amazon bestseller list of Jewish books, Mark Gerson writes that though the word Haggadah means literally the telling, it's actually not. It's a retelling. It's a combination of things, of activities, he writes, listening, speaking, being heard, and responding anew. Together, these constitute a familiar activity, a conversation. Indeed, by telling the story through a standard text and using the fixed text to retell, we are able to have 3 separate conversations during the Pesach Seder. We are conversing with those at our table, with those at Seders all across the world, and with those who relived and retold the story from the Haggadah for the past 20 plus centuries. Or, to put a fine point on it, the words this year and next year that are used so often in the Haggadah are not fixed points in time. This year will be last year, next year. And next year will be this year, next year. And though our last year and our this year were marked by a once-in-a-lifetime event that challenged us and changed us like few others have, I guarantee you that next year and the year after that, whatever journey we will have been on for the previous 12 months, will provide a great deal of resonance to a very, very old text. And that's why we can keep coming back to this extraordinary book, year after year. Because it's not just about the Exodus. It's not just a story that we know. It's a story that becomes new every time we retell it. Imagine reading Halachmanya at a Seder table in Tel Aviv in 1949 or in Jerusalem in 1968. Remember what it was like the first year you had children at your Seder table, when those children were yours and not somebody else's. Think of what it must be like for someone whose table was full of their own food last year, and yet this year, through the twists and turns of life, is nourished by the generosity of others. Like all great Jewish stories, the Haggadah is eternal, not because it is new, but because it is not. Because it has endured for thousands of years, and yet each year it continues to delight, to challenge and surprise us with its wisdom, its uncanny foresight, and its powerful relevance. May our journey through the Haggadah be an incredibly powerful and meaningful one this year, just as it was last year, and as it will continue to be for many, many years to come. Shabbat Shalom, everyone.